Hello and welcome. Diplomatic efforts to end Israel's war on Gaza are gearing up as the Israeli military continues its air, sea and land assault. Some see the moves by leading European figures as late and potentially ineffective, with no end in sight to the conflict. Now, over the weekend, Israel sent thousands of soldiers into the Gaza Strip, taking the conflict to a new level. At least 530 Palestinians have died during the attacks, and more than 2,500 have been injured. Well, Israel launched its operation 10 days ago, saying it wants to end Palestinians' ability to launch rockets into Israel once and for all. Some Israeli leaders say the offensive is to destroy Hamas itself. The French President, Nicolas Sarkozy, arrived in the Middle East on Monday to push for a ceasefire, which so far has been rejected by both Israel and Hamas. Today we ask, what can Israel realistically achieve with this war, and where does this leave the Palestinians? Remember, you can join us with your conversation and your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and then take part. And we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me to discuss the situation is Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, the author of numerous books on the American legal system and Israeli affairs, including The Case for Israel. He joins us from Miami. And in London is Palestinian writer Dr. Ghada Karmi, a research fellow at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at Exeter University. She's the author of Married to Another Man, Israel's Dilemma in Palestine. We welcome both of you to the show. And Professor Dershowitz, if I could start with you, sir, and ask your opinion on how world opinion seems to have effectively turned against Israel in light of its military offensive, certainly at least looking at the presence of people on the streets protesting against what Israel is doing.
Well, this is part of a very brilliant and cynical Hamas strategy. The strategy is something they call the CNN strategy. That's their term. They provoke Israel by playing Russian roulette with the lives of Israeli children. They send rockets at kindergartens, directed at hospitals, directed at Sderot. I was at Sderot as President-elect Obama was at Sderot, and we see the provocation. Then they hide their rockets adjacent to a UN school, a hospital, and provoke Israel to respond. And when Israel responds, and children are killed or women are killed, they're ready with the cameras. And so, of course, it turns world opinion. Let me give you an example of how it works. The day before Israel responded, the Hamas sent a rocket, but it fell short and killed 2 Palestinian girls, young girls. Hamas refused to allow those images to be circulated. They censored images of their own children being killed by their own rockets. So, of course, world opinion is being manipulated by this double war crime, cynical policy of Hamas. And the world ought to know that when it protests what Israel is doing, it simply encourages more and more civilian deaths, because Hamas's goal is to kill as many Israeli civilians as possible and to have Israel kill as many Palestinian civilians as possible. They understand the cruel arithmetic of death. When they kill a civilian, they win. And when they cause Israel to kill a civilian, they win. And the world, by protesting, contributes to this cycle.
Now, Professor, though, but it seems a bit disingenuous for Israel to deny, or at least some of Israel's leaders to deny, that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, because that was something ongoing prior to even the recent conflict.
Well, no, there's no humanitarian crisis. When, in fact, Egypt allowed some people from Gaza to go into Egypt, they saw that life in Gaza, as bad as it is far better than it is in parts of Egypt. The humanitarian crisis is manufactured by Hamas. Whatever money they have, they devote not to building hospitals or education. They destroyed the greenhouses that Israel left behind in the agricultural settlements. They devote all their money to building rockets, to building tunnels. It's a decision of their own making. The old definition of chutzpah is somebody murders their parents and then pleads for mercy on the grounds that they're an orphan. That's what Hamas is doing. It's created a humanitarian crisis in order to appeal to world opinion.
Let me get in Dr. Ghada Karmi here and ask your view on how Israel says it wants to smash Hamas once and for all. Is that something that's even possible, do you think, Dr. Karmi?
Well, no, but let me start by saying I was fascinated by Alan Dershowitz's account of what's happening. I don't recognize this reality at all, and I wouldn't think anybody who's been seeing what's been happening in Gaza in the last few weeks, in the last few years, would recognize any more than I do what on earth he's talking about. And indeed, in terms of propaganda, we know that Israel has worked very hard in the last months to produce a huge campaign of disinformation and beautification of the ugly reality and the brutal invasion and attack on Gaza. And I regret to see that Professor Dershowitz seems to have been recruited for this effort. Now, in
That's
terms
just a lie.
of,
I have had no
what,
contact with the Israeli
Israel
government.
thinks it's
Everything
going
I
to
say
do.
on my own.
Okay. Well, I'll get you a chance to respond in a moment, Professor. Let's get
Well,
to
that's,
Dr.
that,
know,
that
but
makes it actually...
But you can't accuse me of
well,
something
Professor,
that's
that's
just not
even
true.
worse. I wish you had
These
been
are my own
recruited.
ideas.
All right,
Okay.
let's are there goodness? This is very depressing. Anyway, in terms of what Israel thinks it's going to achieve, it's very puzzling as to what it thinks it might achieve. It has said that it wants the rockets to stop being fired at its settlements. It has said that it wants for the prisoner Shalit, who Hamas captured a number of years ago, wants him released. But beyond that, it's not really very clear what it is they think they might achieve. And of course, the way they're going about it is about the most idiotic than anybody can think of.
Dr.
If
Khan?
what they really want is those objectives to be realized.
Ma'am, if I could put you an email we had from
You see,
Scotland.
if you
I could
actually attack people.
Let me just put an email we had from Scotland, if I may. John in Scotland here in the UK wrote in saying, I'm aware that there are many issues here and there are two sides to each story. None should have the moral high ground. May I ask only one question? Why does Hamas continue to fire rockets? I mean, surely that's a way to take the wind out of Israel's sails, is to just completely stop the rockets.
Well, let me respond.
answer that.
You can answer and then let me.
Professor, let Dr. Kami answer and then I'll get to you.
Host.
Sure,
Well, it's up
that's
to our
fine.
host.
Yeah. Dr. Kami first.
Look, the rockets are an expression of resistance on the part of the Hamas leadership, supported by many, many Palestinians. It's a resistance against Israel's occupation, against Israel's brutal treatment of the Palestinians. That's why they fire them. Now, the way to stop those rockets is not to actually attack Gaza and to brutalize and to destroy its structures and infrastructure and kill its children, because the more you do that, the more the people will want to resist and the more rockets there will be. This is not something I'm making up. This is known historically throughout history. No people ever accepted that they should be occupied, brutalized, attacked and assaulted without ever trying to resist.
Okay, let's get Professor...
That is the lesson for Israel.
Let's get Professor
that so
Dershowitz's
long as they
response here.
behave in the way that they do,
Okay.
then they
Let me
will
respond.
have resistance.
Yeah. Professor?
No country in history has previously tried to resist an occupation by murdering children. When the United States was occupied by Great Britain, yes, it engaged in military actions against soldiers. When other countries have been occupied, they engage in resistance against soldiers. What we're talking about here is Hamas claims that the occupation is of all of Israel, of Tel Aviv, of Haifa, of Sderot. Even your guest referred to Sderot essentially as a colony or something that suggests more than a city. What Israel offered to end the occupation, of course, in 2000-2001, Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia said that the peace deal offered by President Clinton and offered by Ehud Barak, rejected by Arafat, was a crime against the Palestinian people. We could be celebrating now the 8th anniversary of a Palestinian state had the Palestinians wanted their own state more than they wanted the destruction of the Jewish state. So, you can say there are wrongs on both sides, but there isn't a democracy in the world that would accept rockets as, quote, an expression of frustration. This sounds like an abuse excuse of some sort. People are not allowed to resist by killing children, by aiming at hospitals, by blowing up schools. Remember that the form of resistance that took place during the Second Intifada was blowing up school buses. The form of resistance that occurred even before the occupation, was blowing up schools in Israel, Ma'alot, and places like that. And so this is a long history. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Husseini, when he made his pact with Adolf Hitler, was preparing a genocide against the Jewish people. This goes back well before the occupation. And the end result is if Hamas laid down its rockets, there'd be peace. If Israel laid down its arms, there'd be genocide. That's the reality.
Professor, let me ask you one thing. When you see the pictures of the casualties, when you see the children
Right.
on the pictures coming out of Gaza, children being killed and children being injured, women and civilians also casualties, what goes through your mind?
Well, I feel terrible about it, and I know who's responsible for it. You know, when an armed robber takes a hostage and holds the hostage in front of him and shoots from behind the hostage and kills people, and a policeman, in an effort to stop the killing, shoots and kills the hostage, the person responsible for that under the law of every government is the hostage taker and not the policeman. And every single child that's dying in Gaza is the fault of Hamas and the responsibility of Hamas. And the only way to stop it is for Hamas to stop sending rockets. Whenever a child is killed by Israeli gunfire, there is terrible agony in Israel. When a child is killed by Hamas gunfire, there is celebration. They create posters. They jump in joy at every child killed in Israel. There is no moral equivalence between what is going on. There are war crimes on one side and appropriate self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter on the other side.
Okay, I'm going to get, I have to take a short break here. I'll get Dr. Karmi's response in a moment and get some viewer questions in. Now, as we pause, let me remind you, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging onto livestation.com and entering the chat room. You can see there's a debate taking place there right now. We've been carrying comments through the show as well. We'll be right back.